So, welcome to the Love Fly podcast. It's Paul Tizard, fear of flying coach, and today's guest is Ryan, who has been a nervous flyer. He's here to tell us his story. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you.
You've come through. You've voluntarily wanted to come in and share this talk. I think you've been listening to the podcast yourself, perhaps, and that's maybe dropping you. But I'll shut up. Tell us about you.
Yeah, do you know what? I'll get to that in a second about listening to the podcast. But I basically found Love Fly randomly through being so scared that I started Googling random ways to help.
Right.
And obviously Love Fly came up, and straight away I was like, oh, this is actually quite different to just a random course or something like that. It's actually real people, and you can relate to the stories.
Yes.
And obviously everyone has different reasons as to why they are afraid of flying. So I'm sure mine will be pretty unique to some people. To other people, they might not get it. But yeah, my kind of basic story is I didn't fly until I was about 19. I've always been scared of flying. And my friends finally got me around to getting a passport and booking a holiday. So we went to Greece for the first time. And that was on a Thomas Cook flight, I think. So it was one of those, probably like an A320 or something. Had no screen, nothing like that. So I just sat there terrified, not knowing what to expect. And like most people, you kind of do the rest in your mind. So you just
so it's for you then. It was like fear of the unknown almost, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess if I outline the fear, if that helps. For me, it's a small combination of things. I think it's partly height is one of them. I really don't like heights, even though when you're actually up there, you don't notice.
Yes,
it's actually quite peaceful in a way. And hopefully I get to the part where I can say to everyone that I've actually feel like I've conquered it, which is great. Yeah, I don't like the height, the feelings you get on takeoff, those typical drop feelings that people tend to over exaggerate, like myself, and the combination of not knowing what's going on. And I think it's just more of a mental thing of just knowing that I'm so high up, and it's just an unnatural thing. I think that's kind of the gist of what I really don't like. It's not so much the control, because I know obviously pilots are way more competent than we'll ever be, things like that. So that doesn't bother me. It's more the fear of just this impending doom that you're just going to fall out of the sky, which we all know is impossible. But it's easier said than done when you're scared of those kind of things.
Yes. So talk us through then. So that was your first flight.
Yeah. So anyway, so my first flight, it was think of it as like a white knuckle ride. I just sat there holding onto the seat in front of me, and I literally gripped the seat and I wouldn't let go. And that was about, what was that? That would have been about 3.5 hours straight. And as soon as I landed, it was that typical thing most people have. Once they've got it done, you never want to get back on.
Yeah.
So like with most holidays, I would always be more excited getting there, like most people, because you have at least you have some sort of incentive to go. And then once you're there and it's kind of like the payoff and the release is done, you're like, oh, it's great. And then you realize you have to go back. And I think with me, I spent so much time with every single flight, especially my last one, which I'll get to, is I spent so much time anticipating it and building up for like 3 months before, and it just got ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was literally for say like a 3-hour flight. For some people it's shorter, for some it's longer. But for such a small window in your life, you spend so much time stressing for nothing. Once you kind of realize how mundane it actually is, it's not actually a fear to be worth being scared of. It's kind of in your head.
That's gold, that, mate. How have you got to? All right, so I feel like I'm jumping about with you. So we've got the beginning. So that's how it started, the white knuckle ride, and then
so that's how that went.
So every flight since then has that been similar?
So basically, I'm sure people can relate. So every flight since then, I've flown a godless amount of time since. God knows, sorry. And every flight got worse because you let your mind run wild and you don't know what to expect. And it's kind of like every single time you fly, you remember all of the bad things in your head. You say bad because it's all little things you're scared of even leading up to it, but you forget 99% of it, which is just, like I said, mundane and nothing happens. It's uneventful. It's kind of like the typical kind of, if you think of it like a trauma sort of thing, I think you just hold on to the tiny memories.
Yes.
And when you look at it, even those tiny memories are uneventful. It's just because you didn't like it. So because I didn't like the feelings of takeoff and what I would do to myself in my mind, I made these things so much bigger than they actually were.
Right.
So each time I flew got worse and worse. And then the biggest flight I did was, I am obviously from London. I now live in New Zealand. So my accent, as you can tell, might be slightly skew. So that's where that's from. So I flew out here about 8 years ago, I think in nearly 2015.
Mm.
And that was one of the biggest moves. And I remember getting to the airport, and that was the first time I flew by myself. So I said bye to my friends, my family, and I was at the airport, and I was just staring at this plane for about maybe 3 hours before, and I couldn't stop sweating. And I was looking, I was like, if I don't get on this plane, I don't think I'll ever do anything significant in my life, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Because it was probably the biggest thing I was ever going to do is leave the country, move around the world. And if I didn't do this, I knew it would be a roadblock that I'd never get over. And I think a lot of people have that same fear, even
Yes.
if they've never flown, even if it's just a small flight. I think that's the biggest thing for people with a fear of flying, is that they build up to be such a thing, and it's literally a left or right situation. If you go left, your life's going to be great in terms of you've done it, you can actually go and do things. If you go right, you hit a roadblock, and that roadblock's kind of like you can't really go backwards because you won't let your mind kind of go forward. So you get stuck in that rut of you will never fly, which I got into after I landed in New Zealand, because that was 2 13-hour flights, I think. And that really took its toll on me, I think, because I can't sleep on flights because I'm so scared. I stay awake. So I was awake for 2 days before, give or take, terrified.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And then almost 2 days flying there.
Mm.
So by the time I landed, I looked like a nervous wreck. And I got stopped at customs in Singapore, I think, just to ask a couple of questions. And they realized pretty quick it's just because I'm scared of flying.
Yeah, yeah. You must have
So
looked
they,
like you must look like a crazy there, like no
oh yeah, I
sleep
looked
all
terrible.
that time.
Definitely, yeah. I know I did, and there's nothing I could do. But they're actually pretty good about it. So the next flight was with Air New Zealand from Singapore to New Zealand, and that was across Australia. And I think the thing I didn't like about that flight is I had to sit at the back, which I've never sat at the back of a plane. And it's just a mental thing, I think, like anything. For me, if I'm not over the wing, I'm not in the center of gravity,
Yeah.
which
Which is
doesn't change
technically
anything.
true, but yeah, I mean,
Oh yeah, but it's so insignificant that it
yes.
really doesn't matter in the real world. It's just a mental thing.
Mm.
So once I got that flight out of the way, I was like, that's it, we've done it. And then the endorphins had wore off, and I just put it off for so long.
Yeah.
And I think the big kicker after that is I'd met a friend whose dad was a pilot, which was quite cool, but I never actually thought to ask him any questions. And on my birthday, we went to go for a meal, but we didn't actually go to a meal. We went to a local airfield where he's got two small Cessnas, which is a good experience. Of course, it's like once in a lifetime thing for a lot of people. And I got the opportunity to basically go for a flight.
So let me so
then,
that's an interesting. So you didn't have the chance to get the anticipatory anxiety. So were you anxious thinking about getting in that thing?
that's a good point. It was so on the spot that I took a deep breath and just said, let's just do it. And then I regretted it as soon as we started moving. But there's nothing you can do at that point.
No.
And I remember
generally
taking
not,
off.
no.
Yeah, no, it's too late by then. And obviously he was really good. He's a lot older and a lot more mature. So they actually, as like most pilots, they're quite mature. So they're very good at like talking you through things to put your mind at ease. And that's all well and good. But as most people listening probably understand, you're not actually in that frame of mind when you're actually on the plane. It's very hard. Like myself, like I could put a movie on, but I'm looking at my peripherals. I'm not really watching it or paying attention to anything else.
Yeah.
You're just in that like that tunnel vision kind of thing. So I literally had that all the way, and I really didn't like that flight because it was just tiny little plane. They don't really sit obviously as they're stable, but they don't feel as stable as like a big airliner, for example.
No, they move about
so
a lot
after,
more, don't they? Yeah, definitely.
I mean, looking back at it, it was a bit of fun, but at the time, yeah, no way. Yeah, after that, I said I'm never going to fly again. But as you can imagine, after 8 years out here, you've got family back in the UK. There's a limit to how far you can push it, and then it gets to a point, and I think most people can resonate here, is that when you have things like family or something like that on the other side of it, there's only so much you can put it off, because inevitably something may or may not happen at home. People get older, and not to go down that road, but should something happen to my parents per se or something like that, am I going to hide in New Zealand for the rest of my life?
Good point.
So that's kind of how I got to flying back, because obviously COVID happened, things like that. And my parents were going to fly over here in April coming. And I live with my best friend from the UK out here, and he'd booked a flight back, and he'd only been here 3 years. And I thought, if he goes back after 3 years and I've been here 8, near enough, it's not really a good look. And I know he'd obviously go and see my parents and stuff. And I thought, okay, I should probably
that'd be a bit embarrassing, wouldn't it? Well, it's right. Oh, yeah, he's a bit busy.
It's literally like that. So as soon as he said that, I think the day after I booked flights, And that's when it started again. And I think, like most people, as soon as the flight's booked, that's when it really kicks in.
Yeah, that's the moment of decision, isn't it?
Yeah. And after that, I spent, well, actually, even booking the flight, this is the thing someone might resonate with as well. Like, even booking a flight, I'll spend a lot of time trying to find, for me mentally, what I think the best flight is, the best route, the best airline, every like perfect scenario, which you can't actually anticipate, but you still try and narrow it down the best you can.
Yes.
So I literally sat there for maybe 3 hours, 4 hours looking at the same flight and kept refreshing the page, trying to decide, is this the one? And I kind of knew it was. And then once I'd hit pay and it had all gone through, I was like, that's it. There's no going back now. And we spent the best part of 3 months after that every single day listening to the podcast. And that's where I was getting at earlier. I listened to all 108, some back to back.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so it's a bit extreme, and I'm sure a lot of people don't take it that far, but it really did help.
So it's during that 3 months you just blasted through those. Oh
yeah,
my God.
I mean, I got quite into running. So if anyone's listening, you don't have to be running or anything. You can just be going for a walk or whatever. But it's quite peaceful. And at work, I do a lot of driving, so I just put the podcast on in the background. And it's kind of one of those things where it's, I mean, everyone has different ways of interpreting things. It could be like affirmations, or, as you say, just reiterating something over and over again till it comes to reality. And for me, I think a few podcasts I resonated more with because everyone has different reasons as to why they have a fear.
Yes.
And I listened to those over and over again, and it got to a point where I could borderline remember, not the words per se, but I could remember the whole thing over and over. And it really did, like, I think it just solidified it in my mind.
Yes.
And it made it more of a reality that things aren't as bad as I think. There's other people out there. And the biggest help was the podcast with pilots. That was the biggest one. And I think for people listening, and even for yourself, I think the pilot episodes are probably the biggest ones, I would say.
Yes.
Because they answer a lot of questions that a lot of people have as to why they're scared.
Yeah. Can you remember, was there any particular pilot? There's some that you literally played. So which ones were they?
You know what? It's episode 46, and I'm going to do my best not to say episode 46 100 times here. I think that is episode. Yeah, I say I think I should know this. I'm trying to downplay it, but episode 46, the stages of flight.
Yeah,
right. I know, with Steve Ball. That one there, and I favorited that on my Spotify and put it in its own playlist by itself. And anytime I got any anxieties or whatnot, I'd listen to that. And it's kind of nice how you kind of play it. You can close your eyes, whatever, or you just imagine the stages of flight. And if you've flown before, it's easier because you know what the plane looks like, you know what it's going to be like, you know, the whole rigmarole. And you realize, like, every single step is going to happen exactly like that. And every flight you look back on, like for me, I built up such a thing of irrational fears of memories that weren't actually true. And then I realized when I listened to the
episode 46.
Yep, episode 46. I realized when I listened to that, every single stage that was explained had happened every single flight I'd had. And it kept solidifying it more and more that it's just a non-event. It's just like a bus driver or a train driver or something. They're just doing their job, and it's such a standard procedure.
Yes.
So episode 46, once again, I definitely vouch for that one.
Ryan's top tip, episode 46.
It will be that over and over again. But it really did help, because I think, like I said, a lot of our fears are just in our mind, and we don't actually have enough knowledge to understand why we fear these things. Like I said, mine was the whole, I didn't understand the falling feeling per se. And then you realize it's just a standard thing that happens. Yes. The whole noise. What's the word I'm trying to think of?
Noise abatement.
Abatement, sorry. Yeah, I was going to say rebankment for some reason. I know it's not a word. But yeah, the noise abatement situation, that's the main one. And once I realized that's all it was, and it's such a non-event, I really, at the moment, don't mind. It's fine.
So, you flew. So you've been to the UK and back.
Yeah, so I recently went.
Yeah,
I'll tell you about that quickly. So that the whole 3 months started panicking, listened to 108 episodes over and over and over again, realizing it felt like an impending doom, as most people will relate to. And days get closer, and as they get closer, they get faster and faster and faster. And you start thinking of excuses, and there's got to be a way I don't have to go. Maybe some catastrophic event will happen. I don't know. I'm in New Zealand. Maybe a tsunami will just get rid of us. You start thinking of all these crazy, crazy things. And other than the help with the podcast, it's which obviously helped. Take that aside, you're constantly thinking of the date, the time, the flight. Do I really have to do it? And then I knew once I get there, I have to come back. And I was like, well, I could just live over there again and then not come back here. So you think of these crazy things. And then, yeah, so the 3 months leading up to that, we got closer to the flight. Flight day came pretty much. I got to the point with the podcast that I felt so much more at ease. I've never been in that kind of peaceful mindset when it comes to flying before, which really helped. So surprisingly to myself, even when I got to the airport, I was actually very calm, which was quite nice.
And that's even just from the podcast. You weren't doing anything else.
Literally the podcast, and I didn't do anything else. But I think the point of my life where I decided enough is enough.
Yeah,
I think that's a big turning point for people. I mean, you could listen to the podcast 100 times over, but if you're not ready or you're not at that point of like that breaking point of that left and right scenario I spoke about earlier, if you never get to that point, it's a lot harder to get the desire to really want to do something you don't want to do.
No,
because you can always find excuses.
Bang on, mate. Yeah, absolutely. So that is the thing, isn't it? The desire, the motivation's got to be there, or there's got to be such an overwhelming, compelling reason that you just think, I've got to do this, whatever it is. I cannot not do this,
That's where I got to. And like I said, 8 years away from family and things like that, it was that inevitable, it has to be done. And because I knew it was inevitable, it was regardless whether I liked it or not, it had to be done. So I might as well try and enjoy it because I had 27 hours ahead of me. So it's 27 hours of trying to enjoy it, or 27 hours of white knuckle ride.
Yes. And which were you?
Definitely way calmer than I thought I'd ever be. There were slight moments, but when you think about it, if I look at the journey from leaving New Zealand to London and coming back, so all 4 flights in total, if you think of it, as each hour went on all of those flights, I got more and more calm to the point where when I was landing back in Auckland, I could happily say that. I mean, it's hard to say that you're completely over something, but I'm pretty much there. Like I couldn't be any less phased about flying if I tried at the moment, which is quite remarkable considering I think I've been flying about 15 years, and each flight has been the most terrifying thing of my life.
Wow.
So it's quite a nice place to be at right now with flying.
Wow. Well, when did you get back?
I got back 2 weeks ago. No, sorry, 2 weeks ago. Sorry, a week and a half ago, and I got stuck in San Francisco for a layover, which actually worked out in my favor because I got a night in San Francisco. So it actually worked out very nicely. And when I flew back from San Francisco this time, we flew with the sun, so it was like a day flight the whole way. So by the time we landed in New Zealand, the sun was coming down. It was perfect time, made the whole jet lag scenario a lot easier. It was a really nice it was a really nice way to come back. But if I go back to with leaving, I remember so I was looking at the plane and I was terrified, and I remembered all of these things, and I was listening to episode 46 over and over and over again, looking at the plane, and I was like, it's going to be just as it says. And with most airports, you can pretty much see when you're sitting at the gate, and I think this is a good tip. If you watch the amount of planes that take off and land, and you just think, I'm going to be next, it's just like you're another one in the chain. There's you're not special. Nothing different's going to happen. You're going to do the same non-eventful thing, and the only difference is you're going to be sitting on there terrified for no reason, where everyone else is just going to be chilling out. That's one thing I noticed.
That's a very good point.
Yeah. So I just watched each plane go, and I was like, one of those is going to be me, and it's going to be so non-eventful. And then next minute, I'm going to be in London seeing my family, and then we'll be done with. And then I can't remember the lady. She was a nice lady. I was listening to her second episode today. You'll know she moved to Canada, I believe, and wanted to move back to the UK.
Fiona Bramsell.
Yeah. I was listening to her podcast earlier driving, actually, and that's quite a nice story too. But that's something I could relate to as well. It's all well and good until you get to that point of walking down the tunnel, because that's the very last point where you can literally call it quits. And I think that's the biggest mental hurdle. And if you can get over that hurdle, once you get onto the plane, you've done the hard work.
Yeah.
I think that's the hardest bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the point of commitment, so it's different things for different people. The booking the flight is a point of commitment, and then getting to the airport, that's a commitment point. And the tunnel is a classic one for a lot of people, because it all kind of, if you're nervous, it narrows the door, and then the buggers shutting the door. How dare they?
Yeah.
All of these are massive moments, and some people say, I really hate the takeoff, and I think sometimes that's also about, that's it. You're in it now. You can't change your mind. You can't opt out. You're there. They're not going to land just because you don't like it.
Yeah, well, that was literally as you said, it's the tunnel, it's the tunnel visual, tunnel everything, and it kind of, all of your horizons suddenly go into a pinpoint view, and all you can see is the door, and that's all everything is led up to. And everyone else is just looking forward to their holiday. Some people are annoyed that the flight's been delayed, or it's an inconvenience for them. But for the
Yes.
rest of us, what people don't realize is you're terrified. And I'm pretty good at putting on a poker face. So
Mm,
when I got onto the plane, I sat next to a lady, and her son must have been about 13. And I realized pretty quick that they weren't too good at flying. So I turned into the guru helping them, even though inside I was probably more scared than they were.
brilliant.
So and that all came from, I mean, the podcast and having a bit more knowledge than they did. And it was quite a
Episode
nice feeling,
46.
literally 46 over and over again. But knowing that I could ramble off these facts like nothing because I'd listened to things so much, it
Yes,
was quite nice for me because I'm reaffirming it as I'm saying it.
definitely.
And as I'm explaining to her, she's getting calmer. And then suddenly I'm like, well, she's in the worst state than I am. I'm not that bad. Then I start feeling calmer, and
Mm,
it's like a endless circle. And I think that's the good thing with the Love Flyer Facebook page. It's kind of the same thing. You've got people that are in different stages of their journey,
yes, yeah.
and you're all kind of pushing each other around on that wheel to the point where someone else will get round to the end, and then they can help the next person. It constantly goes round and round and round.
I
And I
love
feel like
that.
yeah, it's a way of thinking of it. And I think I'm at that point now where hopefully, hence why I'm doing this, that I can push someone else on their journey, and then they can get
Mm,
around to their point to push the next person.
yeah.
I don't know if
Uh,
that makes any sense, but
it
that's kind of
makes
how I was
it
thinking
makes
of it.
brilliant sense, and that is our desire for the community.
Yeah.
It does exactly that, because I was thinking, you look on websites or on companies and they'll have a little
Mm.
strap line, and it's like, and I was thinking, oh, maybe we should have something like get help, give help. And I thought, oh, that's really wanky, but I was
Yeah.
just, but that is what's happening. So some of the most prolific posters, which I like that phrase, prolific posters
Yeah. That's a good
are
word.
people that have been nervous themselves. Now, in
Mm.
fairness, I don't think Love Fly is the only thing that's helped them, because it's about grabbing lots of stuff, isn't it? That, whatever works for
Yeah.
you. Love Fly hopefully is part of that. But it is, as John said in the last podcast this week, it's a journey. It is a journey.
No, you're right. And I think you might not realize, but I think something like, well, not something, maybe specifically Love Fly is a bigger deal to people that have a fear of flying if they come across it than you might think, because there's not
Mm,
much out there, one, to start with for free and has an active community that can help. I mean, if you look at it daily, if anyone goes onto my Facebook page, I don't look like a real person because I have no friends, no connections. I just made the page so I could sign up to something.
mm.
But as you can tell, I'm a real person.
You are, yes.
Um, so yeah, so if you go onto that, it's active people, it's real, and it's quite nice. And I was getting the notifications I get because it's the only thing I'm associated with on Facebook is Lovefly.
Mm,
So it's almost like every 10 minutes someone's posting something, and it's quite nice to see that you've got someone will post their little story or they're scared of something, and then you've got 100 people per post helping someone out, which is quite nice,
yeah,
which you
yeah.
don't get there
It's
anywhere else. So you've built a really good community here.
Well, thank you. I mean, I don't quite know how it happened really, because, well, I do. I mean, I know we had
Yeah.
an intention. Intentionally, I went on one of these courses about, like growing, because originally when I was running the courses before, I had the Virgin stamp on. It didn't really matter what you did because people trusted the brand, and so you had
Yeah.
auto loyalty.
Yeah.
But with the Love Fly, I thought it'd be interesting to see if I could grow it from. Obviously, I did trade a little bit off the I used to run, but I thought it'd be quite good to see whether it just could grow organically, and it's been quite phenomenal, really. And actually, that's down
Yeah.
to people like you doing that, just helping others. So it blows my mind. Sometimes I look at it and just think, oh my god, what these people. When I see like a bunch of news, I sometimes have a mini panic attack myself that 15 people join the same day. I'm like, oh, what do they want? Leave me alone.
But
But
then it
it's
also
actually
goes to
not just
show that,
down to me, is it?
no, of course. And that goes to show that there, anyone listening, you're not alone. There's actually a
Mm,
lot more people that have the same fears than you think.
yeah.
I think a lot of people don't speak out on it. And only people that have found this podcast or this Facebook page even hear this. You think of how many other people out there are terrified and they don't even get this avenue.
Yeah,
So you're
it's
already
true.
one step ahead of most people.
Yes.
That's how I think of it. But it's a really, really good community. And it definitely, like I said, it definitely helped me. Episode 46 once again, in case anyone's forgot. Play that on repeat.
Mentioned it for a while.
I know, I almost forgot then.
Do you know
Um,
the funny? I don't know if this is bad or not, but it's when you said episode 46, there was a sort of a slight moment of panic in my head, and I was like, "What on earth happened on episode 4?" I literally didn't know
no,
what you
nothing.
were going to say.
It's so good, and as you can probably tell, I'm not the best speaker on the spot, but someone like Steve or Pilots or yourself are quite well spoken, and it very much helps
Oh, it's kind
someone
of
like
you.
me listening. And they it's kind of like, I don't want to do it again. I'm going to do it one more time, but episode 46, they tell it in such a good way. It's like a story, and it's kind
Mm,
of, it brings you emotionally to a very good place by the end of it. So it starts
mm,
off, obviously you ask a very basic question that someone can relate to, and then all of your fears, because you imagine it, just heighten. And then as Steve speaks through the stages of flight, you imagine it, and you realize, like I said, for me, it was the takeoff and the height that I didn't like, things like that. Landing for me has never been a problem because I know I'm closer to the end.
that's it.
I'm going to touch the floor in about half an hour. That's all that matters. It's the rest. But him telling it like a story, I kind of go with it too. And you kind of imagine the whole flight. And then by the end of it, like I said, you're touching down. By the end
Mm,
of it, you're at peace.
mm,
So listening to that kind of podcast for me over and over, I remembered after every single episode listening to that, sorry, every time I listened to that episode at the end of it, I felt at peace. So the more I listened to it, the more I felt at peace. And because I knew what was coming, I didn't have those fears every time it started off talking about takeoff and things like that. It just kept going over and over again to the
mm.
point where sitting at the terminal about to leave, I'm listening to the same podcast, but I've heard it so many times that I'm just listening to it one more final time just to solidify that I know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And exactly that those stages happened exactly to a T. Nothing else
Mm,
happened in the meantime. Most of it is yourself sitting there waiting for something which doesn't happen, which is a stressful way to fly. I can tell you that. I've done that enough times. And even my first flight there, I think I landed with like the sweatiest palms, and I didn't understand why, because I
mm.
didn't think I had any fear in me. But looking back at it, the first flight out there, I still did. It was
Yeah.
still kind of new to me,
Yeah.
even though I felt 10 times better. And luckily, the flight was very smooth, which most flights are, to be honest. I think a lot of people have this notion that you're going to be up there and you're going to be thrown around like you're on a bouncy castle or something.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so there's a lot of genius in what you just said there. So I like to
Okay,
let
yeah.
people talk, but you've just hit something which I've been noticing in the Facebook group. People say it was a good flight because it was smooth, and it's almost like,
Yeah.
and I've kind of it keeps striking me that people want a smooth flight, and I like it, and that then means it's a good flight. And I was thinking actually that's arse about face,
Mm.
because
No, you're right.
you like checking turbulence apps beforehand. I know I go bang on about that, but it doesn't make any difference to the flight whether you
That's
what
one
you
thing I
and they're
didn't
not
do.
they're not correct. And the smooth flight, we all want the smooth flight, but it's no less or more safe regardless. So a good flight is one that takes off and lands. It's
Yeah,
as
of course.
basic as that. It doesn't, and it's lovely if
Yeah,
it's
it's weird how
smooth, but that's a bonus.
we emphasize on the words. You don't realize you're saying it sometimes. Even then,
Mm,
if I just did it saying good flight, because I don't mentally think about it being a good flight. It's just the terminology you use. And I guess if
yeah,
you're using that terminology and you hear it all the time, once again you reaffirm it in your head, and then you think
correct.
good flight equals smooth flight.
Yeah,
But I think for a lot of people, that's not actually what you think. It's just the wording. And when you say
yeah.
things like yourself, when you didn't want to name love fly anything to do with fear or anything because the wording doesn't make sense.
Mm,
It's the same thing. And I think the more, especially listen to these podcasts, the more someone like yourself talks and doesn't use that terminology, the less we kind of let go of that way of thinking. Otherwise, if you put 100 of us in a room scared of flying, we're going to sit there and it's just going to go and
yeah.
go and go until all of us pass out of fear.
Well, I'm sensitive to language,
Yeah.
and so I really try and think about that. And when I used to bring on pilots to talk, I'd just say there's a couple of things that you need to know. One is close the loop. So don't
Mm.
leave anything open. Don't say it could, it might, it either is or it isn't. It says
Yeah.
people don't want grey, they want to know. and which then leads to, if you only do one thing, it's express certainty.
Yeah.
So some of the pilots that never got made the cut, you say, is turbulence unsafe? They go, well, no, not technically. No, it's not. It's the answer is no.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're walking about, it's unsafe to you, but is it unsafe? Well, no, it's not. Can turbulence bring down an aircraft? Yes or no? No. Okay. That's all we want to hear. We don't give a shit about the fact that, well, in this incident 50 years ago, turbulence was considered a factor amongst the 15 other things that went wrong. Not helpful. We learn from that. We want the facts and we want certainty.
No,
we
it's
don't
really
want
true.
to lie. You want just certainty. It's yes or no. That's what we want, because then we can deal with it.
Yeah, I think well, the rest of us that have had that fear, we've done the guessing for everybody. Like you said, you want a straight answer. That's the whole point. You want the answer. You don't want someone else to join your rambling.
No.
Otherwise, you'll be running around in circles the wrong direction.
I think sometimes the worst type of pilot that we've ever had speaking is the ones that have done too much time in the office, because then they are so used to having to sort of be a little bit more political with the way they answer that they forget that we don't give a stuff about that. We just want to know, is it safe or not? If the engine stops, what will happen? Is it a problem? Yes or no? No. Great.
Yeah,
okay.
and that goes, I can't remember the episode number, but same thing, that those questions were asked. And if you do listen through all the podcasts, whatever fear you have, you'll find it somewhere in one of these episodes and you'll resonate with it. Hence my going over the episode 46. But you'll find one and you'll grab onto it and it will help. Because there are some things that you might not relate to. Like myself, like I personally, I don't have the fear of terrorism, or maybe the pilots don't know what they're doing. I don't have those kind of fears. And like I said, mine's more of the physical. I don't like the feeling of falling. I don't like heights. It's literally those two things together. But understanding everything else around the stages of flight makes me realize that you can't just fall out of the sky. Physics don't work like that. And it's essentially just a glider. And one thing I thought of, this is not like a miracle thing to say, but I realized that when you're landing, for the most part, you're just gliding. You're literally just gliding down the same way. So should, in some miraculous reason, you lose engines, you'll just do the same thing. And when you're coming down, how does it? You're gliding quicker than, you're gliding at a speed because you need to get down to a certain point at a certain time. If they wanted to, they could glide for a lot longer. And I'm not gonna sit here and go on like I know the facts and everything, but listen to some podcasts. You understand that.
You do.
Yeah,
I mean, that's spot on.
But you do, and you also understand that. You even for me, there's the first time I went to the States this time around. It's the first time I flew over the Pacific and the Atlantic. And like for most people, you think of the water, but there's actually a lot of islands around. There's a lot of places to land. And it never happens anyway. You never need to land there. So you sit there thinking, well, you think of all these scenarios of, well, we can get out of this one, we can go this way. Well, if this happens, we can do that. None of it happens.
No. Well, it used to. And that's why they should have 4 engines. But, it's like years ago.
And that goes back to the whole knowledge is power thing. Once you understand the facts of flying nowadays is for most people, such a mundane thing. And when you look at apps like Flight Radar 24, I think it is, you'll see how many planes are in the sky. And I did that when I was on the plane, when I had those little moments where I slipped back for a second or turbulence hit, and it really was such a non-event. I thought about everyone else that's in the air right now, and it's so non-eventful.
Yes.
And obviously you look around at everybody else, and I realized I'm sitting here stressing for nothing. I did the water trick. I looked at the glass of water that barely moved. And for the first time ever, I got up and walked around, and I went to the toilet of all things, which I never thought I'd ever do. But after 27 hours, it's inevitable. And it's actually quite nice to walk around the plane it actually helps. And I know I'm going on tangents here, but with my feeling, with my fear of the feeling of falling, for example, when you're leveling out or whatnot, and I heard this on one of your podcasts too, if you lift your feet off the ground or put your feet on the footrest in front, you really feel a lot less. It's weird how your inner ear works when you think you're standing when you're not. So if you lift your feet up and take a deep breath, it's all of those physical feelings disappear. So every time I hit, there's another word again. There we go.
There you go. Yeah. Well done.
Every time we encountered a slight bit of turbulence, which was nothing, I made it a bigger deal than I would, of course. I took a deep breath, as deep as I could, and that physical feeling of taking a deep breath takes over everything else, and all you can think about is breathing in. It's almost like you mentally can't think of two things at once when you're concentrating on breathing in. And I think that's why breathing techniques are such a popular thing. And that really helped me. And I'm not one to normally try something like that. I'm very simple. Like I like to think of myself as one of those typical guys that's I'll be all right. Semi a bit of a meathead in a way, like we'll just make it work. But the breathing exercises really did help. And I vouch for that 100 times over. So every time something happened I wasn't too happy with, I just take a deep breath. And by the time I exhaled,
I'm sorry, I'm just enjoying a semi meathead expression.
yeah, I know it doesn't make sense, but I think a lot of guys out there would understand. It's a very easy just to try and get by and be like, I can just deal with it myself. I don't need to try any of these techniques. But they're there for a reason. They really do help.
Yeah.
Same as these podcasts, for example. If a few years ago, if you said to me, "There's a podcast out there that could help," I'd be like, I don't need it. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there. Like, it's not going to help. But you have to try. Like at least try. And I know no one here personally knows me, but like I said, I'm not someone to try new things like that because I always think, oh, it's a farce, it's pointless.
Yeah.
I'll just do it myself. And finding Love Fly and actually trying these techniques, I take everything back, and even down to things in my day-to-day life, it's changed the way I think about approaching new things because I was kind of set in my ways, whereas Love Fly, even outside of the fear of flying, has opened my eyes to maybe try different things because you don't know everything.
Wow.
So Love Fly's done a lot more than just got me over flying. It's actually broadened my horizons slightly in other aspects of life, which is pretty cool. And I think you find that with the community.
That's overwhelming now. That's too much now, Ryan. It's too much. I'm a semi meathead. I can't cope with that.
But yeah, I think the gist of what I'm trying to get at overall as well is that, like, and everyone says it. They say if I can fly, you can. But I'm definitely one of those people. I mean, I put it off for so long, and I've done the whole. I mean, some people have different levels of fear, but I've definitely been that guy where I'd get to the airport and freak out. I mean, I've ruined 2 or 3 holidays because I wouldn't get on a plane. So I've definitely done that before.
Yeah.
But I know that there's a silver lining, and that silver lining of if people think of it as getting over their fear or conquering it, it's real. And once you get to that point, as I would like to feel like I'm at now, it really is bliss because I don't mind what my next flight is. I'm looking at flights now actively to fly just in and out of New Zealand, just small flights. It's kind of fun. Like you get excited over flying now because I think for most of us, because it's such an event, even if we're just doing a standard flight, we're enjoying every single sense. Even though we're not a fan of it, we're embracing all of the feelings. We're enjoying the sights. I think we feel everything more than the average person, whether it's good or bad. And once you learn to turn it into a positive thing, you start enjoying the flight. And like myself on the last few flights when I was going to London and back, I enjoyed every little thing. People were complaining, oh, it's so long, we've been delayed. I loved it. I loved every single minute on the flight because I was like, for a lot of people as well, it doesn't happen every day, especially long haul. Yes. So I'm like, well, make the most of it. Every little thing, like even going for a walk, check out the toilets. Some places, some airlines like Air New Zealand, they put a lot of art and things around the plane. You'll be surprised what you find, or just walking around feels so nice. It's like I don't know how to say it. Like it's such a peaceful thing walking around in the air.
I love it. I totally agree. I totally agree.
Yeah, you look out the window and all of those fears I had of being so high, suddenly because your eye can't recognize how high you actually are, it feels so peaceful. Like you're it's like, I don't know how to say it because I don't want to put the wording wrong because it's not like you're stuck in time in the air because you know you're moving because you can see the clouds going, so you'll know you're moving at speed. But it's so non-eventful. It just feels like you're just standing up in a library or something, but you have the best views, which you can only get from an airplane. And you'd be doing a disservice to yourself if you didn't ever try to get those views because they are kind of like life-changing experiences. Not every day you get to look at the earth from 36,000 feet.
No. Ryan, honestly, we're going to stop there because it's been gold, but that's just been absolutely brilliant. I'm really pleased that you've managed to get to the place you're at. I'm looking forward to hearing about your next flights. And so please don't leave it too long because you've had you've done such a good recalibration and you did the work. You did the desensitization by listening to episode
46 over and over again.
but no, what you're doing is visualizing it and repeat. And I think that's phenomenal.
And I won't ramble on. I mean, I know I said before, like this isn't something I normally do. I know I'm not the best speaker. I just thought if even if
Not true.
one of my sentences might help someone, that's good enough for me. But yeah, I know you say it a lot of it's us or you per se, the person you're talking to who does the legwork, which yeah, to an extent, but to even have the option of having something like Love Flyer, if you didn't have that there in the first place, you'd have nowhere to turn. So I think you, your team, and everyone like that should get a lot more credit than I know it's easy just to be like, oh, you guys do it. But the fact that someone went out of their way to set something like this up deserves a lot more credit because it generally helps people in life. And like I said, flying can change your life completely. So in one sense, I think you should give yourself credit because you're literally changing people's lives on the daily, whether you know it or not. So it's quite a good achievement right there, Paul. You've helped me anyway.
You can give me a big head there, Ryan.
No, no.
Thank you.
You deserve it.
Ryan, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm really gutted.
Likewise.
I think I'd like to please come back and do another one. I'd like to hear about your next couple of flights as well. So maybe get another couple of flights under your belt.
Yeah, I'd love to sit down and maybe structure some points. I actually have like a bit of, like I said, a story. So it actually makes a bit more sense to people listening. Then I could maybe make it a bit more of a journey per se, and actually have a bit more of an ending at the end where it actually makes sense. But I'd love to come back and do it again.
No, you have made sense, and there's been some really great bits in there as well. And I'm just so grateful that you're able to make it on.
Thank you,
and that the episodes have helped you, and that you absorbed all 108. That's just phenomenal.
Yeah, I'll keep going.
Yeah, there's more coming, and you're going to be part of it. You're out this week, so thank you. Thank you for listening to the Love Fly podcast. And if you want to find out about more that we do, please go to our website, lovefly.co.uk, and you'll see a list of other options available to you should you need them. Thanks for listening.